On a Tuesday morning in February 2013, complaints start to trickle into the front desk of the Cecil Hotel. The water's coming out brown, one guest says. It tastes metallic, says another. I can't shower in this. The front desk clerk is used to hearing complaints like these, working at the Cecil, an infamous hotel located right in the heart of downtown LA. The maintenance supervisor, a weathered man who's seen everything the Cecil can throw at him, finally decides to investigate. He's dealt with burst pipes, backed up sewage and electrical fires in his 15 years here. Water problems are usually pretty straightforward. It'll be a broken main, corroded pipes, maybe even a dead rat in the system. He climbs the narrow service ladder to the rooftop and approaches the 4 large water tanks that supply the hotel's 600 rooms spread out across 14 floors. He notices that the lid on the furthest away tank is sitting slightly askew. Now that's not so unusual. The wind and weather up there has been known to be strong enough to shift the heavy covers. But as he approaches, he's hit with something. A smell so pungent you could almost touch it. He lifts the lid, the one that he'd noticed wasn't quite on right, and peers into the darkness below. What he sees will set off an investigation and internet tidal wave that will leave the employees dumbfounded, web sleuths intrigued, and detectives scratching their heads. But the reality is, it's all part of the history of a hotel that has seen it all, including a lot of death. I'm Claire Murphy, and this is True Crime Conversations, a podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. Floating in the dark water, 19 days after she was last seen alive, is the body of 21-year-old Elisa Lam. The Canadian student had checked into the Cecil Hotel on January 28th. She was on a solo adventure, travelling around the US and experiencing the life she'd always dreamed of. On January 31, the day before Elisa was supposed to check out of room 514, she visited a bookstore and spoke to the staff. They would be the last people to have any contact with her. Now, you may have already seen Elisa if you spent any time on the internet. Police would release a video of her stepping into the elevator. There's no sound, but her actions alone are creepy, disturbing, and for those investigating her disappearance, incredibly confusing. She steps in and immediately scoots to the wall beside the door, putting her back to the surface where the buttons sit. She seems to be glancing outside, possibly looking for someone that she doesn't want to see her. Is someone following her? She presses some of the buttons, not just for her floor, but multiple floors. She repeatedly steps out of and back into the elevator. Again, she puts her back up against the wall, on the outside this time. At one stage, she makes gestures with her hands, and it looks like she's either trying to touch something that isn't there or is speaking to someone who isn't there. Strangely, the door to the elevator stays open for this entire time, even when she's outside it. The doors remain open, allowing us to see Elisa and her strange behaviours from the camera mounted inside the elevator itself. It's only when she eventually disappears from view do the doors finally close, and Elisa Lam is never seen alive again. What led to her ending up inside the water tank up on the roof has been the cause of speculation by thousands of people across the globe. But for those who called the Cecil their workplace, the case is just one of many deaths they've had to face during their time manning the desk. Amy Price managed the hotel for 10 years, including the time Elisa Lam died. She has many tales to tell about the grand entrance Cecil, how that very expensive chandelier in the lobby gave her and the hotel's guests a false first impression when so much darkness lurked not only within its walls, but all around it. Amy joins us now. Amy, thank you so much for joining us today. I think the thing that's stood out for me in reading your book and seeing you in the Netflix documentary is there is such a weird clash between you as this kind of young, glamorous, very well-dressed woman working in a hotel that had a reputation in a place that seemed really quite hard to do. And how did you feel walking into that place on your very first day? And I apologize because we refer to it as Cecil, but I understand you guys pronounce it as Cecil. So walking into the Cecil that very first day, what was your very first impression? And I know that you mentioned in the book the lobby certainly did not match the rest of
No.
the hotel.
Yeah, and you have to understand, when I first started at the Cecil, it was supposed to be only for a few days. So I was helping a friend gladly, glad to help, and looking at it as a very temporary situation. And when I was driving downtown and noticed the area, I certainly, I was unsure. It didn't look that great. So, but also in the same breath, for years and years, people talk about the revival of Los Angeles, and it seemed like it would be really a great opportunity to be a part of it. So my first day on the job was definitely overwhelming, just trying to navigate such a different place. I was given a tour, and none of the things that I was seeing were anything like a hotel I had checked into before.
Can you give us an idea of what the building is like? Because it's funny because on the outside, there's these really big signs that advertise that there are 700 rooms within this hotel structure, which is like these big towers, which is massive in itself. But also, apparently, there's 600 rooms, which is a weird, weird thing in itself. But can you explain to us just how huge this place is and what it was like in the different sections of the hotel?
Well, when I first started, it was all one section. It was a hotel along with full time residents. Had the same look. Everything was the same, and just a very very rundown, bare bones place. A place that I had never visited before in my life. There's zero air conditioning. The rooms are about 120 square feet. They Most of them do not have a bathroom. I had never seen a hotel without a bathroom in the U.S. at that time. There weren't any youth hostels where it was normal for Americans to be doing a hostel situation. So just the overall setup, the public bathrooms, the demographic of the people walking around, it was all very very different than anything that I'd ever experienced before.
Well, you mentioned that you got a tour of the hotel from a man who has become quite a good friend of yours since you worked together for such a long time, Pedro. And he tells you pretty quickly that a lot of people die inside the Cecil Hotel. Can you tell us a few of the things that he filled you in on that first tour?
100%. So during the tour, we went into a lot of the rooms that were unoccupied, and they had been unoccupied for years and years and years. Um, so a lot of cases we're walking in, and there's just bad smells, and it's not necessarily always related to what happened in the room, but there were just like unsettling scents every time we walked into a room. And I would ask him, "What happened in here?" It just I got the vibe that there was a lot of things that had gone on in some of these rooms, and he shared a lot of the stories with me, which again was it was interesting to hear that these situations had happened and he had seen them. And to top it off, while I was doing that tour, somebody did pass away, at the hotel, and I heard it on the intercom, and it shocked me. I thought, "What's going on? Somebody's died." It was my first experience with anything like that. And he said, "Yes, it happens all the time." And I thought, "Wow, okay." And again, as I stayed on longer and got familiar with what was going on at the Cecil, these aren't murders, that are going on. That's what people tend to jump to, is that they're murders and things associated with that. But a lot of them were just old age, overdose, of course, but not murders.
Not to say that there weren't any murders, though, because you mentioned in the book that the rooms that you were first given, because you're only supposed to be there for a few days to kind of overhaul a room to make it look like a big chain hotel, in this idea that maybe it would be turned into that eventually. And the room that you're given to overhaul, you're told a murder had taken place in.
Yes, you're correct on that, and that involves my friend Pedro. And it was a circumstance that happened many years ago, where somebody had been stabbed in that room many many times. And to top it off, my friend Pedro at the time was taken in for questioning. And if you ever met him, I mean, there was just no way that he would be capable of harming anybody.
I'd love to get an understanding from you and myself and the producers of this show of talked about this as we've been researching your story. Like, if any of us were taken into our new workplace, shown around, and I understand you're only supposed to be there for a few days to start with, but if someone showed me this place and told me people die here all the time, I probably would have turned around and walked out on that day. What made you stay?
The creative element, I'm extremely creative. I've been creative most of my life, and it was an excellent opportunity to do something new. The vision. I was more sold, I guess, at that time on the vision of what would be the end result, which would be revival and a lot of opportunity. So that's why I continued to focus on exactly what I was doing. And at that time, I wasn't involved with when those things happened. I wasn't taking care of it like I would pretty soon, But at that time, I was focused on what I was hired to do. At that time, we didn't have iPhones like we do now. Like, where you would type in the hotel, the history. I mean, I would have known so much more if things were different during that period, just exactly the history. And maybe I would have asked, a few more questions prior to, starting the position, but that information was not available. It was just known that downtown Los Angeles was a rough area and that they were trying to make a comeback.
Can you give us a bit of an idea of what downtown LA was like? Because, I mean, at some stage, Skid Row was basically right outside the Cecil's front door until it was kind of shoved back a little bit. But what was that area actually like around the hotel?
It certainly wasn't great, that's for sure. If you walk on the sidewalk, you see a lot of homeless people, and that's shocking in itself to see so many people in despair. That clearly don't have a place to go, and we're also catering to those people at the first of the month. At that time as well. Downtown Los Angeles, I feel and still will say, I feel is dirty. It was dirty, but there was also evidence that things were moving along. There were a lot of developers that were working on multiple projects, at the time with high-rise housing for the young and the hip, and I just became sold on the story that I wanted to be a part of it.
You mentioned that you served a lot of those people that you saw outside the building on the first of the month, and that was due to their welfare checks coming in at that time. So they would come to you to try and find somewhere to stay, even if it was for a short period of time.
That's correct. I mean, my first experience with the first of the month was shocking. I remember walking into the lobby and seeing such a long line of people checking in with garbage bags, and then, I ask a lot of questions. I'm a very curious person. So Pedro was always that person for me. And, I would ask him, what's going on? And he said, oh, it's the first of the month. They got their checks. So they'll come in for a couple of days and clean up and then go back out like it was normal.
In the book, you mention that the Cecil is sometimes referred to as the hotel inside a hotel because at one stage later on down the track, there is like a more high-end hotel created within the building, while at the same time it's still servicing those people you were talking about. And some of the people who are longtime residents had been there for decades and decades, which is really interesting too. How was that for you to run two very different businesses at that time, catering to people who were really doing it tough while also welcoming guests who are travelers, essentially?
Well, I would say that there is actually three categories. The full-time tenants, which is also, another whole category, and they were located in a certain area in the hotel, and then the Cecil Hotel, and then the stay, which was, inside the Cecil. So we never could quite separate them because of the elevator banks. So all the demographics are riding up together, and that was tough too. There was some tough times on that. But initially, when we did launch Stay, it was originally called Stay. We had a lot of success. I mean, we were on the cover of Hospitality Design. I mean, that's something to be proud of. To be able to create a concept and work on site to make it happen. And it was a lot of hard work that was very intense. And we did it in a short period of time, but it was super rewarding. To see these people arrive. From all over the world. Stay at a hotel that you designed. But the link between the two properties, with the two elevator banks, they were always mixed. So that, there were circumstances where these young travelers are riding with some of these people with garbage bags, and it was questionable, but it was inevitable.
You talk about some of the people who lived at the hotel for long periods of time that you got to know quite well. You
Yeah,
must have some favorite characters from your experience over the 10 years that you worked there.
I do. I do. Yeah, there was one I did write about in the book that he was absolutely crazy. He was crazy from the beginning, but there was just something about him that just we developed some sort of friendship where I would say I have a soft spot for him. I mean, some of these people they just didn't have anybody, so it's not like I had a lot of time to sit around and talk with them, but that I did get an opportunity to get to know a lot of them and learn about their lives and their history and where they came from, and I found that quite interesting too. This particular one that I'm talking about, he passed away, and I even tried to locate some family members. Like, but most of these people didn't have anybody. They were just alone.
What's really sad too, and that you do outline in the book really well, is how many of these people died alone inside the rooms of the Cecil. Sometimes people didn't realize they'd passed for quite some time if their rent was being paid. And often you would go into the rooms afterwards and have to clear out people's personal belongings. And sometimes they would really almost have nothing.
And that's true. I mean, I was told many times, just throw everything away. There wasn't anyone to come for the property. It was just, like they were just gone.
Can you talk to me about the mental health issues that seem to impact quite a large amount of people who ended up staying at the Cecil? Because, as we know, mental health can impact people who do end up on the street, and that sometimes can be the reason why they do end up without a home. But that's something that you were having to face every day, and you're not a mental health professional. None of your staff were healthcare professionals. How was that for you to try and handle those people who were obviously suffering, maybe not medicated, maybe struggling with medication? Like, that's a lot for you guys to take on board.
Yeah, there were a lot of very, very difficult challenges when it came to that, and in some cases, safety, where people are off kilter and, they're, and they could be perceived as dangerous. These could be people that are running in from off the street that aren't staying there at all, or people that are staying there. So I really tried to do the best I could to support my staff, like how to handle these situations, and always call the police when you feel unsafe. But that's another thing to note, that in that area, the police don't come right away. You learn that pretty quick, when you're calling the 911. And I know I do write about this in the book, because most people think, if you call 911, help is on the way. And in some of these areas where they're probably extremely busy, it's just not the case. So I always, emphasize, when you're making these calls, for the police support, like, please let them know you're in danger, that you see a weapon or whatever, to get somebody over there to help you, because we were not equipped to deal with those things. We were not.
That, of course, would also lead to quite a few people taking their own lives within the building as well. How was that to try and, because not only were you confronted with that as a staff member in that hotel, but also you would have people who would come back and say, "Can I see where my son spent his last moments?" Like, you were essentially supporting family members in the aftermath of that too.
Yeah, there was two major cases where that did occur, and it was extremely hard, just to work with the family, and especially they're dealing with something that is just, it's just awful, So, there was a particular case where a woman passed away, and the sister did drive up from San Francisco, and we did build a relationship just with her and what she was dealing with, and she needed my support on what to expect. She hadn't done anything like this before. Like, it was um it was hard, but I also learned a lot more about the person that passed away, and that, come to find out, she struggled with mental illness her entire life, and her sister said, this time she finally succeeded. Like, it wasn't the first time. It's chilling, and it's sad, and all those things, and I knew her. I knew her. It was, and then with the other suicide, that was It's also in the book, and it truly like the most. So out of all the people, and I estimate probably over 80 people died while I worked there, that I only saw one body. And I'm not curious about that stuff. I never wanted to see, but it was getting closer to the end of my tenure there. And a young man jumped off, I believe it was the eighth or ninth floor. He landed right on top of my office. I mean, I felt the impact. I was sitting there from the beginning, like, oh my gosh, what's happened here? It's a lot to feel, And when the police came, we were able to find where he jumped. He hadn't actually even been staying at the hotel. And the police officer said, oh, I said, is it really bad? I was sitting out there like in the hallway, just letting them go through their investigation. And the police officer said, it's not bad at all. It's just like the movies. Come over and take a look. Just like that. And for some reason, it was probably curiosity, or maybe all those years and knowing that it was coming to a close, that maybe it would be okay to take a look and I could handle it. And when I looked over, I'll never forget what I saw. Such a young man, just life lost. I mean, it was extremely hard for me to accept after I saw it. But then, a couple of weeks later, his father arrives at the hotel, and this is the only person I've ever seen. And he's arriving at the hotel for me to show him where everything occurred. And it wasn't scheduled. He just popped in, and it was something I'll never forget. Sitting out there standing on the sidewalk in downtown Los Angeles, meeting this man's father, and he's asking me to show him, where his son died. And I knew quite well that I didn't have a responsibility to do that. I didn't have the responsibility to do that. But after talking to him, and he asked me directly, have you ever lost anybody in your life that you loved? And I had. I lost my father suddenly. It was a sudden death. And he said, I'm not here to harm you. I'm not here for a lawsuit. I'm here so you can show me where you died. And I looked at him with, I believed him, and I said, I will show you. So it was just the two of us with Pedro going up the elevator bank, and he had told me that while we were outside that he was a retired police officer in New York City, and he explained that his main problem was how things were handled here, and how he learned how his son passed away. He had been out mowing the lawn, and he heard his wife screaming inside from a telephone call. So, I mean, that's just hard to imagine. And this young man was very young. I want to say, like, in his 20s, he was young. And so when we were going up the elevator bank, I did say to him, I said, I saw your son. I just don't understand what happened. And he expressed that I believe there was some sort of sporting accident or something that happened, like maybe in his younger days, and maybe he just wasn't the same after that, and he had struggled with mental illness. He said that he had just talked to his son that morning when he was released from the hospital, and it seemed like he was on the right track. And when he was found, I mean, he had plugged in his cell phone number, or plugged in his cell phone in the room that he jumped from, deleted everything on the phone, and there was a bag that said patient belongings. It's just something that I just couldn't even get out of my head. Patient belongings. Like, he came directly from the hospital to our hotel, and he jumped. So it was really hard to take that ride with him, but also I think it was a little healing on both sides, a little, but I mean, how do you ever get over anything like that?
I was going to say, I got a feeling maybe his father appreciated that you at least could walk him through those final moments for his son.
Yeah, I did. And I also, his wife was in the car, and she was just too upset to come in. And I said, if she changes her mind, just let me know. And I mean, that was the only meeting we ever had, but I'll never forget it.
You mentioned before that on entering the Cecil, you didn't have access to like the internet in your pocket like we do today. So you didn't know to Google all of the history of the place, but you would have started to learn over the 10 years that you were there about the hotel's history. What did you learn about the hotel itself, like where it had come from and the things that had happened there that made it such a landmark of downtown LA?
That's what I find fascinating about the hotel, and I often have referred to the hotel as like, using the Titanic as an example, because a beautiful ship was built. It was supposed to be unsinkable, and we all know what happened. It didn't work out for the Titanic. I feel it was the same for the Cecil. The time that it was built, in the 1920s, people weren't driving cars. People were taking trains. They were taking buses. Men were traveling, not so much women. So this was really designed for the business traveler, and you can find evidence on that like all over the place. Built for the modern businessman. Well, I mean, that's certainly that ship has sailed on that, but in some ways, I feel I feel a lot for the Cecil that it didn't work out because it was built to be something and it couldn't keep up with the times. And that's because of the way that it was built with the bathrooms. It's just, or, in what kind of demographic, once people are taking, automobiles to work, what kind of demographic is going to be staying at a hotel once, things advance without a bathroom in the room?
Yeah. And it's the location's quite close to a train station too, right? So it had great location. It was fully geared up for the time that it was built, but
So there's even
just too late.
Yeah, there's even a news piece that I have, and I haven't been able to confirm if it's actually authentic, but there's a news piece, LA Times, about how a celebrity is arriving to the Cecil, to stay there, and you see these elaborate 1920 automobiles that are in the parking lot next door, and it's just hard to imagine what that period of time must have been like, because I never got to see it, as far
Yeah.
as the glitz and the glamour.
Well, what comes with hotels, and the Cecil isn't alone in this, in sometimes things happen inside its walls that give it a reputation. And for the Cecil, there's a few things. So some high profile criminals are reported to have stayed
Yeah.
at the hotel. Were you aware of that?
Absolutely. Even before, in the early days, people often would come to visit the hotel because of hearing that possibly the Night Stalker stayed there, even though there is no evidence that he actually stayed there. But I am not saying that it didn't happen. There was also an Austrian serial killer that stayed there, and that's confirmed. He did stay there, and a lot of people actually came from Austria over time to check it out because of him. Yeah, but at that point, it had been years. Like Richard Ramirez would have been in the 80s. I started at the Cecil in 2007.
Does that confuse you why people are so obsessed with stuff like that? Because I understand you used to also get a lot of people asking you if the place was haunted and whether, ghosts walked the halls too. Does that confuse you of just how obsessive people get about the darker side of the hotel's history?
It truly is. There's a category of people that are just continue to be intrigued by the building. Even if I drove by today, there would be people outside taking pictures. People are intrigued. They're drawn to it. They like a good ghost story. I've never denied that there are ghosts or not. I mean, my personal opinion is I think that the living are more scary than the ghosts, but there's a lot of stories, and there's only one that I can actually identify with that I would say that's definitely like a ghost story that I'm familiar with, but the rest, I mean, that's their personal experience.
Well, that does bring us to probably the hotel's most high profile death. And I understand that you have copped quite a bit of online abuse since this story was profiled in a Netflix documentary. We do want to hear your side of it in your words, because, of course, you were managing the hotel at the time that Elisa Lam passed away, well, disappeared to start with. Can you give us an idea of what it was like when you first heard her name? Because you were dealing with her before her disappearance too, right?
Yeah, I was aware of Elisa Lam while she was staying at the hotel because she was disruptive. So when there would be an elevated situation, I would be brought on board, of course, to assist the staff in making a decision of what to do. And in this particular case with Elisa Lam, it didn't take long where she was disruptive, and she was staying in a room with eight other women, like
Because there were like dorm-like situations in some of the
correct.
rooms,
Yeah, it
wasn't there?
slept 8 people. So, and of course that's the cheapest rate, with the bunks. But she was leaving notes, on other people's beds, and she was not letting people in the room and asking for passwords. It just didn't seem to make sense that like she was going to fit in with the others, just because of her behavior. So what we decided to do was just put her in a different room, I believe even for the same price, to eliminate what was going on. And you also have to take into consideration that yes, she was displaying, odd behavior, and we did have to relocate her, but we were running a hotel, not a hospital. So when that would be the first step to try to manage a situation where everybody could stay peacefully, and we're still having her at the hotel, and that seemed to work, and then she disappeared. So those
So
two things happened first. She stayed, in a room seven other women. We relocated her to her own room, and then she went missing.
So the police then do turn up, and by this stage it's February 1st, but she was supposed to check out before that. So it's really common policy that if people don't check out and you check their rooms and they've left stuff behind, that you guys just automatically pack it up and put it aside in case they come back for it, right?
It's a common occurrence. I mean, you'd be surprised, what people do leave, in hotel rooms, or they don't check out. So there wasn't really a flag at that point. Just, that just was protocol to, actually bag up her property, and then, wait to get contacted, and most likely have to ship the contents. So that's probably what we imagined the case would be. In the meantime, she's missing, and but then things would unfold when the police got
So
involved.
at that time when someone doesn't check out, like it wouldn't be automatic for you to contact police and let them know that this person hasn't checked out.
Absolutely not. You wouldn't be contacting the police. You wouldn't be contacting family. It's just not the way hotels are built. You just, you get ready for your other check-ins, and you have to, collect the contents, and stand by for a phone call.
So the police then do come to speak to you guys because Elisa's parents have gotten in contact with them because she was supposed to contact them every day and they couldn't get a hold of her. What do you remember happening from that point when the police arrived? Because press attention came pretty quick after that, didn't it?
When the police arrived, they asked questions, and we told them everything that we knew. Everything's documented. The hotel had logbooks, security, entries. I mean, we did a pretty good job on and documenting and having the information that would be, helpful to them. So at that point, the police officers decided to essentially move in the property, and gain access to all of our security footage, which wasn't a problem for us at all. I mean, we actually gave them their own room and full access, and they were just on their own for, I think, days, actually, just reviewing all the footage, trying to find anything. And that's what would strike the next phase of the media coverage, when they did find her on the elevator in that footage, and they released it to the press. And I know I've seen it many times. It's very bizarre. So that's where things really changed about what's going on with her. Where is she? She's at this hotel with a dark history, and it essentially exploded from there.
So I think if the Cecil hadn't had the reputation that it had with some of the stories that were already floating around online, that maybe Elisa's story wouldn't have been as intriguing to all the web sleuths that started to step in.
Yeah, well, and then ultimately the way that she died.
Can we talk a little bit about the police theories and the investigation within the hotel? Because they brought in sniffer dogs
Yeah.
to try and trace her as well. What was their investigation and their initial theories about what had happened to her? How did they come to be?
Well, as the days went on and she was still missing, I mean, it was alarming, and I can say that I never felt that she would be found at the hotel. I mean, my feeling was, she's struggling with mental illness. Maybe she walked in an area she shouldn't be, walking in, and she, got taken advantage. I thought, something like that might have happened to her. I would have never imagined that she was at the hotel, you know. So the concepts, the theories that evolved with the two police officers that I worked with daily, they started asking me where the garbage is being taken out of the hotel, you know, talking to our employees. I mean, it was shifting to like, oh my gosh, you think someone here, like the garbage, like, you know, so to me it was unimaginable, you know, I unimaginable that could be the case. But again, we cooperated every step of the way, and I know that they would say the same about our team and us. So when the dogs, that wasn't a surprise, you know, they told me that they were going to be coming in with dogs, and you know, I was a part of one of the teams walking through, you know, we did our best. And that's when I learned, when Elisa had gone off her medication in the past, that she liked to find a place to hide. So then I thought, we're looking for someone sleeping in one of these closets, like, you know, because she had gone off her meds, and I guess you can, you know, stay up for an extended period of time, and you could experience paranoia, and then you could crash.
And a 600-room hotel, plenty of places to hide, right?
Exactly, yes. And I remember going through, you know, that process and thinking, you know, this would have been nice to know in the beginning, because if she's in a closet, let's find her. You know, I mean, you know, we looked everywhere for her. I certainly wanted her to be found. You know, I we did our very best to, you know, to cooperate and do everything right. You know, and so then after the dog search and, you know, I guess continued, you know, contact with the police, it kind of faded a little bit because there wasn't any findings. So then, you
Although
know,
when you look at it in hindsight, the sniffer dogs took the police to the fire escape,
they did.
and they didn't think anything of that after that, did they?
And the dogs were also on the roof. They did go to the roof. It's just the time of year. It was February, so it was cold. You know, they didn't pick up anything there. But I mean, the you know, the tour was on the roof as well, so nothing was missed when it was, you know, when it came to trying to find her.
Can you talk me through the moment that the maintenance workers came to you and said that they'd found her body?
Yes, at that point, I'd worked there many years, and Pedro, who, you know, I dedicated my entire book to him. He rarely ever presented a major problem. I mean, you know, he could handle a lot, and nothing was ever too much. So the day that he came into my office with Santiago, who was also, you know, a part of the Netflix show, and you know, the maintenance person that actually discovered Elisa Lam, they came in, and he said, "Price, we have a problem." You know, people that know me well, that's what they call me. My last name is Price. And my heart just dropped, because I knew that the problem must be so big for him to even say something like that to me. So, close my office door, we sit down, and that's when he discloses, you know, that the missing girl, she's here. And yeah, and I asked, where? And he told me, in the tank. And at that point, it all happened so fast, but also, you know, slowly, because it's a lot to process, you know, just take in, you know, and obviously being the one in charge and having to handle it all was my responsibility. So once I learned what I needed to learn, I asked them to leave, and I remained in my office with the door closed for several minutes, because I knew at that point that this, in my mind, it was over for the Cecil. You know, I mean, how would you ever bounce back from something like this? And what was going to happen once I made the call? And I understand that people feel maybe I should not have called my mother, but I already knew that she was gone. So it was, I guess maybe it was just like a reaction that I had, because I knew I wouldn't be able to receive any support for hours. You know, my next steps and what would happen after was an absolute mob scene, and would remain a mob scene forever, actually.
When you do finally call police, one of the officers tells you that he'd actually received a phone call from a clairvoyant that almost sort of points them in the right direction. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, so I was working with two particular police officers, and I immediately tried to call them, since they were, you know, the lead investigators. I tried to call them first, versus the 911. I wasn't able to reach them, so then I had to go with 911. And where you're sitting at from the Cecil, you could hear the sirens come. It's not far. So I would meet up with him a couple hours later in the lobby, along with many other people that arrived. And he took me aside and said that he had been an investigator for many, many years, and he had served or received so many different tips, and also from clairvoyant psychics over time. But he said this one really was pretty chilling. That he had gotten contact, so he had been contacted from somebody in China, and the message was, "She's in the water." But given that the time, and we hadn't found her, how would you even? I don't know what to say.
Yeah, that's a pretty difficult connection to make, isn't
Yeah,
it?
right.
I mean, obviously, this news impacts a lot of people, but I'd like to start with how it impacted your staff and yourself, because you guys are pretty used to death in the Cecil. You've heard it happen many, many times. Some of your staff have to clean up after some of these times. Did Elisa's death hit differently, you think?
Yeah.
And especially because it was so widely publicized?
Yes, it affected us all so much, and in so many different ways. But there was a lot of trauma, with our staff. It was a lot. I mean, I offered, some therapy, like if people wanted to talk to somebody about it, because that's how I felt that could be necessary. That is not something that you should have to experience on the job. Not to mention, I never ever want to forget about the loss of life. A life was lost. A young woman died, and the way she died is horrific. But life was lost. Someone lost a daughter. I'm not sure it ever returned to being the same. I mean, the employees, I'm not sure they ever drank the water again, which I can understand. I mean, we did everything right as far as to try to turn it around and fix it and make it a safe place to be again. But after that happened, it changed everything for the hotel, really. And then also it quickly went into the hotel death and all the horrible things that happened at the Cecil, and just an absolute rehash of everything that's occurred over time, like we were living in that day again.
Something you do also cover in your book is how this impacted Elisa herself, because you described the tank where her body was found. It wasn't ever designed to have anyone inside it. So it wasn't designed for anyone to get out of it.
Yeah.
So you talk about the fact that you think about her a lot, and you think about what that experience would have been like for her and how scary that would have been for her.
What that elevator footage means to me is somebody that is very paranoid. Somebody that is, yes, she might have been afraid, but mostly paranoid. And if she was looking for a hiding spot, she found one. But to me, when I envision that her path and how she ended up there and the result, because there would have been some time before she actually passed away, it's almost hard to even think about. Just being there alone, knowing that there is nobody to help you, and it is a restricted area, so there wasn't anybody around, to hear her when she probably did go into distress.
It also obviously hit Elisa's family very hard too, and they did fly in from Canada and come and speak to you. And as you mentioned, when you helped the man whose son had jumped from the window, you also took the time to spend some time with Elisa's family too.
I did. At that time, when the Lambs came to Los Angeles, I was contacted through our attorney, and the request was, "Will you have the? Is it okay to bring the Lambs here and show them where their daughter died?" And I didn't have to do that, but I felt that was fair. I felt that was fair. So there was quite a few people that arrived that day to go up to the roof. On our side, it was Pedro and I, which always that was that way, was Pedro and I, and then a team of attorneys on the other side with the Lambs. Riding separate elevators. It was uncomfortable. It really was. I've you know in most business meetings, you shake hands, and it wasn't one of those. So we met on the roof, and I'll just never forget the horror and what it felt to to hear and see Elisa Lamb's mother and the pain that she was in. It was horrific. And for Pedro and I off to be on the sidelines, just allowing them their time, it was heart wrenching because it's hard to understand, and the pain that woman felt and she displayed that day, I'll never forget.
It also too impacted every single resident who was staying or who lived permanently at the Cecil as well, because it impacted the water supply for them. And so you had to essentially evacuate everybody. And then you're in that hotel and there's no people. That must have been a really surreal moment.
It was, and again, I don't want to highlight the hardship of the hotel and everything that was related to what happened to Elisa Lam, but it was an extremely difficult time because we didn't have any water. I actually had to drive around downtown Los Angeles in my personal vehicle looking for lodging for our tenants. It was, and that was, the same day, that occurred. But we also had to relocate all the our other guests to other hotels, and we were pretty much always the cheapest hotel in town. So that it's a little different when you're now relocating everybody else to other hotels in town, and not to mention the horror. Everybody out front, and the media and helicopters overhead. Just no words to even really describe what all that was like.
And eventually, you describe in the book how you just had to empty the water in those tanks and just let it kind of all flow out.
Yeah. Yep. All the water was drained, and we were shut down for quite some time, and we had to lay everybody off at the hotel. We did, it was an eerie time for sure to be present in a place where usually the lights are on and people are in and out, and suddenly it's just a crew of maybe 5-6 people.
How did the Netflix documentary impact you guys? And I know you personally have had quite a horrible time of it, because the internet has its own theories about what happened to Elisa Lam, even if the police investigation and their findings say otherwise. People believe other things, and they believe things of you. How has that impacted you and your team who've contributed to that documentary to try and tell that story?
When I was asked to participate in the Netflix show, I was no longer at the hotel. Those days were over. I had been asked many, many times for comments. You wouldn't find any comment from me at any time with anything that happened at the hotel. So when I was asked, I really thought about it, and I thought, I've never said anything. Maybe it would be helpful to explain to people what actually happened, because I'm aware of all the conspiracy theories, and I was there. There's not really anything I can't answer when it comes to her disappearance, what happened to her. And I thought it might be helpful just to clarify. That was my reason for participating. I just never saw the rest coming. I really didn't. So it took me all by surprise. I never lived in Los Angeles to be, on camera or anything like that. So the things that happened immediately after, the show came out were, in the beginning, it was fairly crippling because I just wasn't expecting it. And then the things that were being said, like, are hard to hear, that I've heard that people do not think I have enough emotion. Well, when you're being interviewed and you can't even hear most of the questions I'm being asked. I'm just answering the questions, so my interview was much different than the other people that were on the show, and I'm the most credible source because I actually work there, so my family was threatened. I've received multiple, threats that, people are coming for me and my family, things about my appearance. It was really a lot to take, and it went on for quite some time.
What's it like for you today? Are you still having to deal with that?
Occasionally it happens, mostly on social media. It does happen, but I've learned how to work through it, and I fully understand. The lesson is that no one's ever really we're not all gonna agree, and there are people that just can't accept that was the outcome. They want it to be something else, and I think that's gonna remain the story. And I know that I was 100% honest, and I've answered all the questions and shared everything that I know. And I'm also terribly sorry that it happened in the first place. It's It's awful.
What finally made you walk away from the Cecil?
I actually probably would have never left the Cecil. The Cecil closed. So it was purchased by a group, and they had their own ideas of what would happen, with the hotel. So we closed it, and I was a part of that closure as well, which was also a really sad time. All the things that we had been through together, 10 years, I learned so much in the period of time. It was really hard to leave. So that really is the reason why I did leave the Cecils, because it actually closed. And the moment that I walked out the door, it felt like it was a lot to process, looking up at the building and thinking, it's over, because every day it was constant chaos. It was always just constant chaos.
And you say that, and you outline it really well in your book, but when you say chaos, you actually really mean that sometimes, a naked person might run through the lobby. You've been, physically threatened, or there's, a lovely man who you describe who just gave you lovely compliments every day. Like, it was just one extreme to the other for that time, wasn't it?
Yes, and I have to say that there's resilience in the chaos. I learned resilience.
So what's there today at the Cecil?
They're presently, as far as I know, filling it up with homeless people. So it's returning to basically a hotel that is housing the homeless, which, we have a lot of homeless people here in Los Angeles, and they do need housing. So yeah, it will never be a hotel again. I can't imagine they would ever operate as a hotel again. It's over for the Cecil in that way.